Good evening. Welcome back. I understand we have some new folks joining us midweek and that we lost some folks. They were here the first few days. I was told it wasn't my fault. It's hard not to take it personally. But those of you who are joining us, let me tell you what we're doing. Like I said, welcome to Phoenix Seminary. I just made the seminary that I am a chancellor of mobile, and I brought it up here to you. And we're walking you through the longest recorded sermon we have of Jesus. We call it the Sermon on the Mount. And the Sermon on the Mount is basically found in Matthew 5, 6, and 7. And what we're going to find is even though Jesus gave this probably on many different occasions, different times, but Matthew puts it all together to summarize basically Jesus preparing to invite us to become one of his disciples. And yet what Jesus said in Luke 17 is, you need to, Luke 14, you need to count the cost. When I invite you to become one of my followers, one of my disciples, it's not a flippant decision. I mean, are you going to take this seriously or you're not? And Jesus says, so don't run to make a decision. But you need to understand, how does a disciple of Jesus Christ think? So remember, he gave us the Beatitudes. That's how he introduced the sermon. And the Beatitude is the thinking of the kingdom ethic. If I am going to indeed, when I die, still be alive, and that is that I'm going to live forever in a new heaven, new earth, and I'm going to receive a reward based on the resume of how faithful I was in this life. You remember Luke 19, faithful in little, faithful in much. And so, based on the way I live out this calling to become a disciple, is going to determine how God's going to trust to use me in the new heaven, new earth, other dimensions. I'm just at the beginning. When I turned 70, boy, I thought I ought to be dead by now. That just feels so old. But like I said, when I realized I'm only 70 years into an eternal life, oh man, I'm a niblet. I am just starting this thing. And I want not to make major mistakes in my life. I want to be able to do all that I could do to be faithful in this life. I want to become a disciple of Jesus Christ. So remember the Beatitudes, he introduced the sermon by telling us this is how we live out a kingdom ethic. This is how we think. You got to think right before you do right. And then remember, he talked about in our second session, the influence you're going to have. If you're going to think this way, you're going to be salt and light. You're going to be the one that's going to bring hope to people who are beginning to feel a little hopeless with life, like things are crumbling around them. And when they watch you living out the Beatitudes, that kind of an attitude, they're going to come asking you. Remember 1 Peter 3:15? Always be ready to give an answer, an apologia, a reason for the what? The hope that is in you. Always with gentleness and with respect. And so then we moved from there to the fact, well then, how does one, if I become a disciple of Jesus Christ, how do I talk to God? What is this prayer thing? And we walked through last night the Lord's Prayer, as many people call it. Well, tonight we want to go ahead and pick it up on, again, how do I prepare to make my decision on whether or not I really seriously want to become a disciple of Jesus Christ? Because remember, at the end of the sermon, at the end of Matthew 7, there's an altar call. And Jesus is going to simply say, well, based on what I've told you, you want to come. You want to follow me. You want to be one of my disciples. Well, here we're going to pick it up in chapter 6. And Jesus is going to address, I'm walking us through portions of the Sermon on the Mount. Because unless we're going to be here 6 months, we can't go through the whole thing. But I'm just kind of picking out the major things. And this particular one, a lot of people do not think it's very spiritual. Because it's about money. It's about possessions. And before you kind of start checking me off, hold on. Jesus is going to add even to the wisdom of Solomon. Solomon wrote this in Proverbs chapter 11, verse 23 and following. The desire of the righteous is only good, but the expectation of the wicked is wrath. There are one who scatters and yet increases all the more. And there is one who withholds what is justly due, but it results only in want. The generous man will be prosperous. The generous woman will be prosperous, and she who waters will himself, herself be watered. Now, do you take the Bible seriously or do you not? This is the words of Solomon, wisest man who ever lived. We all would admit that. And he's simply saying that, this world is really divided into the givers and the takers. People are rethinking this whole thing of their money and possessions, especially during this pandemic time, when a lot of people are having a hard time even accumulating some of this money. So this issue of generosity, an issue of greed, it pretty well splits humanity these days. You're either one way or the other. And you say, well, I'm kind of generous. That's like trying to be kind of pregnant. I mean, you are generous or you're not generous. The question is, how generous are you? Or the question is, how greedy are you? Because in this span, a disciple of Christ is one who understands that the quality of life, the joy of life, is a issue of generosity. Jesus wants to talk to us about how do we enjoy our money. And again, like I say, people, this isn't spiritual. Wait a second. Hold on and see what the scriptures actually say. The Bible talks about this concept of contentment. And we all know what contentment sounds like, but most people are not, but apparently it's a real thing. Paul in Philippians chapter 4, verse 11, Paul says, I've learned to be content in whatever situation I'm in. If I have a lot, that's great. If I have little, that's fine. But notice he says, I've learned to be content. So apparently contentment is not something we're born with. It's not in the DNA. It's not all of a sudden you wake up one morning and you just say, I am a contented man. Not at all. According to Paul says this is something he learned. Now, my question is, okay, Paul, where did you learn it? Well, I have a hunch. Paul studied under Gamaliel. Paul was a brilliant scholar, rabbi. And if he studied under Gamaliel, he would have studied the writings of the wisest man, as I mentioned before, in Israel, Solomon's writings. He would have class Solomon 101, Ecclesiastes 202. And here's Solomon, towards the end of his life, he writes his journal. Now here is the man who is wealthier than anybody. He's king of Israel, can do anything he wants. The guy's got 900 women in his life. Wives and concubines. The guy considers money like gold being like rocks and sand. I mean, I don't know about you. If this guy says, let me tell you what I've learned about life, I would be interested to read his diary. I would like to read his journal. Now, most people don't want to read it because it's Ecclesiastes and the way it begins. Vanity, vanity, all is vanity. And people goes, let's read something else, Myrtle. But we think vanity means meaningless. That's a ridiculous translation. The word is havel. Life is not hell, it's havel. And havel means simply vaporous. And the whole point of his journal is, how do you extract enjoyment from the gift of life that God gives you here, even when it just flies right through your fingers like a vapor? Like, how do you enjoy perfume? Not in the future, not in the past. It's always in the moment. How do you enjoy food? It's in the moment. Unless it's Mexican after 7, then I, at my age, will enjoy for a couple of days. But usually the idea is that you have one window to extract the enjoyment of the experience of the gift of life. And the future, plan, no problem. The past, learn from it, good idea. But you're never going to live in the future. And you're never going to live again in the past. You're going to live right now, this moment. This is your opportunity to extract enjoyment from life. Well, in the end of chapter 5, this is where I think Paul learned the secret, as he calls it, to contentment. And it has everything to do with generosity. He says this in Ecclesiastes chapter 5, verse 18. Solomon says, now here is what I've seen to be good and fitting. I like to see what the guy has to say. To eat, to drink, and to enjoy oneself in one's labor in which he toils under the sun during the few years of his life, because God has given him, for this is his reward. See, this life you're breathing right now, it's the first reward from the hand of God. And Solomon says, what I've learned is to enjoy it. And you enjoy it. He talks about eating and drinking. You think, well, that's not very spiritual. No, again, when do you enjoy eating? In the moment. When do you enjoy drinking? In the moment. And so he gives us the key here. He says, so God has given us this life to enjoy. Furthermore, as for every man to whom God has given riches and wealth, he has also empowered him to eat from them and to receive his reward and rejoice in his labor. This is that gift from God, he says. For he will not often consider the years of his life. In other words, fly right by, because God keeps him occupied with the gladness of his heart. Now, notice this guy. Solomon says, there's this guy, and God gives him riches and wealth. And then it says, and God empowers him to extract enjoyment. That word empower is the Hebrew word shalat. And the Hebrew word shalat means that God gives a capacity to extract enjoyment from what you have. And he says here that if I acknowledge that what I have has been given to me by the hand of God, because of that gratefulness, God shalats me. He gives me an ability to extract enjoyment from what I have. You go, well, anybody enjoys what they have. No. Look at the next verse. Chapter 6, verse 1. There is an evil which I've seen under the sun, and it's prevalent among mankind. A man to whom God has given riches and wealth, and honor, so that his soul lacks nothing of all that he desires. Whoa! This guy gets more stuff than the first guy. This guy gets riches and wealth, but this guy gets honor and everything his heart desires. So which of the two guys should be more content and more happy? Do the math. The second guy, right? He's got more stuff. But listen to what Solomon says. But God has not shalotted him. God has not empowered him to eat from them, for a foreigner enjoys his stuff. This is havel and severe affliction. Now there's my question. Why is it that the first guy, he gets shalotted, and so he enjoys what he has? Second guy has more stuff, but God doesn't shalot him. Everybody else enjoys his stuff. He just pays the bills and does the maintenance. What's the difference? The first guy acknowledged that all that he was given to him by the hand of God. Gratefulness. Second guy never acknowledges. He thinks everything that he has, he earned and he deserved. And so God says, fine, you're on your own. And he does not shalot. He did not empower them. What is contentment? Contentment is simply this. What is it that Paul learned? Paul learned, I need no more to enjoy my life, because what I have, I so enjoy, because God has shalotted me. That's why you can see people that don't have very much, and they act like they've got everything. And you kind of wonder what's wrong with them. Nothing's wrong with them. They've just acknowledged that all that they've been given has been given by the hand of God. Why do you think in 1 Thessalonians 5:18, when people say, well, what's the will of God? And Paul says, the will of God is in everything give thanks. For this is the will of God in Christ concerning you. Now, why would God want us to give thanks for all that he gives us? Well, it's because he's insecure and, he's kind of tired that no one ever says thank you. No. He's got angels going, holy, holy, holy every day. He doesn't need our praise and thanksgiving. So if it's not for him, who's it for? No, you got your mask on, but for us. Why? Because Paul had learned from Solomon that you acknowledge that what you have, that home, that car, that job, that health, that bank account, that IRA, whatever it is, when you acknowledge that's been given to you by the hand of God, then he will shalot you. He will empower you with the capacity to extract such enjoyment from what you have. You need no more. And when you need no more, guess what you are? Content. And why is it such an important thing? Darryl, when are you going to get into the Sermon on the Mount? In a moment. But see, contentment is the whole key to generosity. And generosity is the whole key to enjoying your resources, enjoying your money. There's an epitaph in Warwickshire, England, and the description says this: "Here lies a miser who lived for himself and cared for nothing but gathering pelf. Now where he is or how he fares, nobody knows and nobody cares." See, Jesus is quoted in the book of Acts. It is more blessed to give than to receive. That's like next time you get your root canal, enjoy it. I mean, it makes no sense. Let's be honest. Jesus says more blessed to give than to receive. I am sorry, that's hard to swallow. And the reason giving's difficult is because we all want quality of life. And if I'm generous and I give part of my quality of life away, I'm just losing part of my experience of the enjoyment of living. So grasshopper. Unless generosity is part of the secret, the key to the enjoyment of the quality of my life and the possessions that I have. And again, I know I can look at some of your eyes. Some are still wondering, this doesn't sound very spiritual. Did you know that of the 38 parables that Jesus gave, in the Gospels, of the 38 parables Jesus gave, 16 of them have to do with, guess what? Money. There is more about money and possessions in the New Testament than about heaven and hell combined. Prayer, pretty important. We have 500 verses in the New Testament teaching us about prayer. Guess how many verses we have in the New Testament talking about our possessions and how and what we do with our money? 2,000. 2,000. And so this is something that has to do with the heart. So with that in mind and a long introduction, let's look at Matthew chapter 6, and we'll pick it up in verse 19. And Jesus says this: "Do not lay up for yourself treasures upon earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal." He says, as you're rethinking about how you view your money, how do you secure it? How do you get it? One lady said she didn't want to marry her husband for his money, but she couldn't figure out any other way to get it. Everybody's thinking about, how can I get more money? How can I increase my resources? Some have adopted a philosophy: get all you can, and then can all you get, then sit on the can. Hold on to it, because that's your money, that's your possessions. And that's the only way you'll enjoy it, is by having it. But notice he says here, do not lay up yourself treasure upon the earth. The word here, do not lay up, and the word treasure, same Greek word. Literally, he says, do not treasure up for yourself treasure. Because if you're thinking about serious investment, now honestly, you're thinking about serious investment of your money, resources. And you can add time and energy, but he's talking about money, resources. He says, I have a few warnings for you. He says, here's just wisdom. Think it through with me. He speaks of beware of moths. What is that about? In ancient time, wealth was basically invested in clothing. Clothing was not mass produced like it is today. So it was really expensive. And what you wore, your attire, was your financial statement. Much like in our culture with a car. A lot of people think, well, if I have a real nice car, that kind of shows people. Because in a car, it's transportation on the inside. But what you're really driving the thing for is that statement, so people can see how successful you are. Well, that's what they used to do with their clothing. Some even went so far to have gold threads woven into the fabric to display their affluence. The only problem is now all of a sudden moths became a real threat to your investment. Because you put all your money in clothing and you wake up next day and moths, they've eaten most of it up. And then he says rust. This word rust is brosis. Literally, it means an eating. Every time it's in the scripture, it's basically it's translated eating, but it's rust here because remember the story Jesus gave in Luke 12 about the guy had so much wealth, and the wealth was stored. If it wasn't in clothing, it would be in grain. And so you build more and more barns so you can protect your wealth, your resources, your money by all this grain. Well, that's great. All of a sudden now rats and mice and insects become a real threat to you. You may find that all that you have invested is gone. Then he says, beware of thieves. Well, if I'm not going to invest it in clothing, that's dumb. And I'm not going to invest it in grains because it may be eaten and destroyed. Well, I'll just put it in the bank and let it just sit there and draw interest. Well, it sounds wise. The only trouble is that this word here literally is break in. Thieves will break in. It means dig through. The banks back in those days, well, the walls were made of baked clay. And all a thief needed was a good pick and shovel. And come through the back door and your stuff's gone. See, security of investment. I feel like an investment counselor now. But the security of investment is his point. And when we think about, all right, your possessions, how do you secure it? Jesus says, realize it can wear out, be eaten away, or stolen. That all the possessions, the money, the whatever I have, it is fragile, transitory, perishable. I mean, have you looked at your IRA lately? You know, we have Darryl, you're 70, almost 71. Why are you still working? Well, because I looked at my IRA lately and I'm going to be working for a while. Because again, things on this earth, how am I going to secure my resources and my money so I can enjoy it? Well, again, Solomon in his journal says, life is havel, it's vaporous, it's going to move by real quickly. And you've heard many times you never see a U-Haul truck following a hearse. The point is you can't take it with you. So how can I enjoy my stuff, my money, my possessions now as a disciple of Jesus Christ? Well, he says it, if you can't protect it here, why don't you send it ahead? Yeah, but here's the rub. You got to believe there's something ahead. But is there something that by the very means of being generous and sending it ahead, treasuring not to myself on earth, but to heaven, where it's secured by God, is there any kind of purpose, significance, enjoyment of that? Well, look at what he says in verse 20. Jesus says, but lay up for yourself treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroy, and where thieves do not break in or they steal. Now, is Jesus saying it's sin, it's wrong to have possessions? Oh, no. As a matter of fact, Paul in 1 Timothy chapter 4 warns about false teachers who will say that you ought to be condemned for possessing money and having wealth. Just the opposite. As a matter of fact, in 1 Timothy 1 verse 4, he talks about the fact everything God's given you is given it to you to be enjoyed as long as you give. Take a while to guess what he says. Thanksgiving. Remember, he wants to shalat you. He wants to give you the capacity to extract enjoyment from what you have and enjoy it. He's not condemning planning ahead for your family. Again, it was the wisdom of Solomon in Proverbs chapter 6. Remember the story in verses 6 through 11 about the ant? During the summertime, the ant gathers. Well, for what purpose? Because winter's coming. And that ant that's planned well will then be able to provide for that ant and its colony in the winter. That's Solomon saying, therefore be like the ant. So this idea of saving, investing, thinking about your kids' education, kids' college, the future, it's all biblical. It's all wisdom. Well, then what is he talking about here? Treasure your gifts to heaven. What does that mean? Well, again, it's the Apostle Paul that picks this up and says he was the one who studied under Solomon. Here's what he said. It's in 1 Timothy chapter 6. And he even addresses you on this one. Here's what he says. Verse 17, 1 Timothy 6. Instruct those who are rich in this present world. So now he's going to talk to those who are rich in this present world. You are godless, going to go to hell, you self-sucking. No, I'm sorry, that's not what it says. Boy, I thought I've heard some preachers say that. No, let me read you what the text actually says. Instruct those who are rich in this present world not to be conceited. Don't think you're a little God just because you can buy your will. That's a real danger of having lots of money. I mean, honest, come on. You go into a nice restaurant, and how do the waiters treat you? Especially when they have a hope that you're going to give them a good tip. They treat you like a god. Well, what are you going to have? May I bring you some more water? May I scratch your back? I mean, it's just almost like they will just, your will be done in the restaurant because you can afford it. And that's what he's saying. The first temptation of somebody who's wealthy is you can get used to buying your will done, and you start getting used to having your will done. And then when it's not done, you get angry. And why are you angry? It's because you're not being treated as a god. That's the first threat. Then he says, or fix their hope on the uncertainty of riches. What makes riches uncertainty? They're fragile. They're transitory. You don't know what's going to happen with the stock market. You don't know what's going to happen with the IRA. You don't know what's going to happen with this investment, that. He just simply says, don't put your hope there. He says, but put it on God. Now watch this. Who richly supplies us with all things to enjoy. You're kidding. Is this in the Bible? Darryl, you one of those prosperity preachers? No! I'm reading to you the Bible. And here's what Paul says. That God will richly supply us with all things. And why? For the purpose for us to what? Feel guilty. Feel ashamed. No. To what? Come on, anybody home? Work with me here. To enjoy. You could talk through those masks. I can hear you. You could talk through your nose, so I can hear you too. He says, instruct them. Here it is. Instruct them to do good, to be rich in good works, to be, here it is, generous and ready to share. Storing up, there it is, for themselves, the treasure of a good foundation for the future, so that you may take hold of that which is life indeed. So Paul tells us here, treasuring up, putting the treasure ahead, the reason God has given us possessions and money is to enjoy. So the question then is, how do you enjoy them? Now you say, well, I'm not rich. He's talking about the rich. No. Back in this day, if you had one cloak and two tunics, basically, and you knew where your meal was coming tomorrow, you're considered wealthy. They only had meat once a week. That's why they ate usually barley, because that was the cheapest bread. No. If you had discretionary funds, you had money, and you could decide what you want to do with your money, by definition, he's talking to us right here. That's the wealthy. And he's not talking about a blast of generosity. Somebody speaks to you and makes you feel real guilty about what you have. Or they go ahead and say, you ought to really give to this. Radio GIVE. Give. And you kind of sit there and go, oh, you know, Mark, we need to give. No. It's what we call present infinitive. To do good. This is a generosity. It's a lifestyle. This is what a disciple of Jesus Christ, this is how they live. Not from time to time, but always. So notice he says here, so therefore, do good with your funds. What's good? The Hebrew word here is the chesed. It means that creates the well-being of another. It's translated agape in the New Testament, caring about the well-being of another. It's the Hebrew concept of shalom. Being able to bring peace and well-being to another. It is recognizing the imago Dei within them. That is recognizing they bear the image of God. And therefore, remember in 1 John 4, God is love? Well, God is love. What does that mean? Love is a verb. It is a verb in John 3:16. God so loved the world. But in 1 John 4, God is love. The verb is He is. So if the verb is He is, what does it make the love? Predicate nominative. You ninth grade English teachers, I make you proud. Now, all predicate nominative is it restates the noun. God, in his essence, is love. That means God values what he creates, no matter how it turns out. That's in the essence of who God is. And he's created mankind to bear his image. And the way we recognize that somebody bears the image of God is God's desires that they're valued by God. They'll be valued by the disciples of Christ. That is, the children of God. Paul says, be generous and ready to share. This word generous is an English word, comes from the Latin term of noble birth. Because back in these days, it was only nobility that really cared about the well-being of others. Everybody else was just trying to survive. So to be generous is to be noble. But what makes something noble? What makes a gift good? A good gift? Well, it's the Paul, again, who tells us exactly how that works. Turn, if you will, or listen carefully to 2 Corinthians chapter 9. In 2 Corinthians, you've got Christian Jews down in Jerusalem, and there's been a famine, and they're hurting. And because they're Christians, but they're Jewish, they're getting really beat up down there in Jerusalem. So Paul goes to the Gentile churches, and he's trying to raise money for these starving, hurting Christian Jews in Jerusalem. And that's what chapter 8 and chapter 9 is about in 2 Corinthians. So the context is about money. And listen to what Paul says here in 2 Corinthians 9, verse 7. Let each one of us do just as he has purposed in his heart, not grudgingly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. You know that word cheerful is the word hilaros. I'm not getting political, but hilarity. I don't know, usually when we take the offering, you don't see a lot of hilarity. He says, and God is able to make all grace abound to you, that always, watch this, having all sufficiency in everything, there's contentment, you may have an abundance, watch this, for every good deed, as it is written. Now he quotes Psalm 112, verse 9. He scattered abroad and he gave to the poor. His righteousness abides forever. God scatters and cares for the well-being of his own. How does he do that? What's his method? Answer, the disciples of Jesus Christ. He says, now he who supplies seed to the sower and bread for food will supply and multiply your seed for sowing and increase the harvest of your righteousness. Whoa. Slow down. God who supplies seed to the sower and bread for the food. So the money that I make, the money that I receive, the resources I have, apparently there's two purposes. Some of it is seed for me to sow, and some of it is bread for me to eat. The bread is for me and my family. And how do I become content with the bread that God provides for my family? Okay, Darryl, here it goes. Only if I am content. If I am grateful for the bread that God gives me, he'll shalat me, remember? He'll empower me to extract enjoyment from all that I have. But he says some of what I have is not bread for food. He says it's seed for sowing. And it has something to do with increasing the harvest of my righteousness. Read on. You will be enriched in everything for all generosity, there it is, which through us is producing thanksgiving to God. For the ministry of this service is not only fully supplying the needs of the saints, but is also overflowing through many thanksgivings to God. Because of the proof given by this ministry, they will glorify God for your obedience to your confession of the gospel of Christ and for the generosity of your contribution to them and to all. Now, what's going on here? He's simply saying seed is to be sown. Now, and sown in generosity. But what makes a gift of generosity seed that I'm sowing? Notice, what does it produce? He says it increases the harvest of righteousness. How so? Because it is producing praise and thanksgiving to God. Holly and I got married. We were fairly young. Holly had a great job, Wilshire Boulevard, downtown LA. She made about $600-700 a month. I was a junior high pastor. I was pulling in $150. So our budget was a little under $1,000, and that worked out great until Holly got herself pregnant. I helped. The point being is, so she'd carry little John for, you were in your 9th month before she had to quit. So our budget went from 1,000 to 150. I went back to work at McDonald's just to be able to provide for my family. At that time, our car broke. We had a little 69 Volkswagen, and it broke. So we had to put it up on blocks in the one parking spot. My dad let us use this old beat-up Fiat. Remember those little roller skates on wheels? Little Italian jobby. The only trouble is that the top had been ripped off. Well, we had to park it all right there on Woodman Avenue, and that's okay, except for somebody came one night and stole the seats. So I actually, Holly's right here, so verifies it. I had to go down to the dump, get 2 tires. One tire behind the driver's wheel and the other tire over there. You didn't want to sit too close to the steering wheel because you go down the hole. And I will never forget. I'll never forget Holly with little John at the time, and I got the choke out, so you don't even know what a choke. I had that choke out trying to get that thing warming up, cooking. And I remember looking over at her, and she had a little John and freezing, and I'm just going, this is so pitiful. We just didn't have much money. It was around that time, there was a student that I was going to seminary with named Wilt Roberts. And Wilt came by one evening about 6 o'clock, around dinner time. I went, great. Will, good to see you. Come on in. Have dinner with us. We've got an extra bean. I mean, it's like, I was not thrilled to see him. He said, no, I really can't stay. And he gave me an envelope, white envelope, and he left. We opened it up, $325 in that envelope. We went, you got to understand, we needed about $300 or so to fix the car. That night, 2 people hit the ground, and guess what that money really produced? Praise and worship and thanksgiving to God, so that how many years later am I still talking about it? You see, that's what he's talking about. You want to enjoy generosity? It's when you can take money and you can actually produce worship and praise from the lips of others because of your investment and bringing peace and caring about their well-being. That means you don't throw God's money away. I don't give to the Red Cross because people don't praise God. I give to those ministries that I know people will respond and give praise to God. Now, if I know somebody works for the Red Cross and they make sure that they know this is God's provision, then I will invest into them as well. So the point that he's making here is simply this. We can take the money that God's given us and we can convert it when we sow the seed into the needs of others who will give praise and thanksgiving to God. We've converted money into the most precious commodity. Praise and worship to God. And notice Paul calls that a ministry that identifies you as a disciple of Jesus Christ. There's a tombstone marker that simply says, what I gave away, I saved. And what I spent, I used. And what I kept, I lost. See, the writer of Hebrews in Hebrews chapter 6, verses 10, 12 is a great promise. Hebrews 6, verses 10 and 11. It says, and God will not forget your love for the saints. God won't forget you. Remember last night? When you give to the poor, you're lending to God and He will repay you. That is, again, do you believe that He's there and He keeps His promise? Well, let's go ahead and finish this up. Verse 21, back to Matthew 6. For where your treasure is, there will be your heart also. Now, this is interesting. The lamp of the body is the eye. And therefore, your eye is clear, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If therefore the light that is in you is darkness, how great is the darkness? What he's saying, he takes a little part of the body, the eyeball. And without the eyeball, light doesn't come into your body and your whole perspective of life is changed. Ask anybody who is sightless and they have developed other ways to be able to conduct, but they would love to have sight because that sight brings health to the whole body. So he says, be careful how you invest your money. Because here's the kicker. Your heart will follow where you invest your money. If you kind of feel your life has no passion, here's how you develop passion. Your passion will follow where you invest in your money. And if you're investing your money into people, your passion for people will deepen. If you invest your money in other things, you treat something precious, it becomes precious to you. And he says, don't go cross-eyed on this one. The way you invest your money, especially into people where it is producing praise and thanksgiving to God, he says that will affect your whole life. That will let the true light in and affect your very passion of your person. So he closes by saying, no one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will hold to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. Basically what he's simply saying, either you're going to try to use God to get more mammon, or you're going to use mammon to serve God. In other words, if you're generous, how generous are you? If you're greedy, how greedy are you? And here's the interesting thing. There in 2 Corinthians 9, when Paul says, some of what I give you, some of what God gives you is seed for you to sow and bread for you to be grateful and to enjoy your life. But notice he makes a promise that God, the supplier, will increase your, does he say your seed or your bread? It says your seed. God is looking for people that do not need spiritual Drano. God's looking for folks that he can flow even more resources to. Because the problem is a whole lot of us, we're chewing on the seed. And we think the bread and the seed, and it's all ours to chew on and eat. And yet God says, oh, but my disciples, if you begin to see some, I'm not going to give you a percentage, but some of what you have has the purpose of sowing it into ministries, into here. I promise you this, any money you invest here at Cannon Beach is going to have an effect that there will be people who will come to Christ, give praise to God, and will worship. You'll not be wasting a cent. Indeed, your ministry of generosity ought to include, for Holly and I, this camp is part of our commitment. Well, I close with this. Holly and I, as I said, we just celebrated our 50th anniversary a few weeks ago. And we have some friends, the Andrews, up north. And we've talked about this with them, and they've talked to us. And for our anniversary gift, they gave me $50, and they gave Holly $50. I got this $50, and I have it tucked right back here. Because you know what we're supposed to do with our two $50 bills? Give them away. Holly and I, we're just kind of looking, as we live our lives, looking for people around, people who have a real need. I did this before. I only had $20. It was given to me, and I just dedicated that to. And I'll never forget this little lady outside the mall. She was sweeping and she just looked really down and out. I just drove by and rolled down the window, and I said, "Dear lady, this belongs to you." Gave her the $20. Then I put the window up and I drove away, but I did look in my rearview mirror. And through my rearview mirror, as I watched her, I saw the broom drop and the two hands go up. Can you think of a better way I could have enjoyed $20? This $50, I'm going to have a blast with it. I don't know where it's going to go yet, but I do know it's going to go somewhere that brings peace and meets a real need of somebody who will then convert that to praise and thanksgiving to God, and therefore I will have enjoyed generosity. That's why Jesus says, you want to become my disciple? Then you better take a real look at how you view your money, because to follow me means to be generous, to understand God gives you the bread, he shallots you. Give thanks for what you have. You'll learn contentment because he'll cause you to so enjoy what you have. You need no more. And then you're going to be able to start identifying seed. Money that he's given you that you have choice to what you want to do with it. That's seed to invest in the lives of others. so that be converted into praise and thanksgiving to God. And you will find there's nothing more great. Just one more quick little story, because it happened to us. When we were young, married and little boys. I remember one time we had dinner, and when the bill came, I asked her ready to pay for the bill, and the waitress said, "What's already been paid for?" I said, well, who? Oh, they already left. So ever since then, Holly and I, from time to time, I'll still remember that Mexican restaurant, Ajo Al's. A little Kevin Anvik, our sound guy, bless God, sound guy, and his wife and two little kids. And they're having their meals, and Holly and I looked over there. So we called a waitress, said, "Hey, we'd like to cover their tab. And if you ever do that, big tip, 30% minimum tip." And we did that. And then we just kind of stuck around. We were finishing up our flan. Oh, love flan. And we look over there right when the waitress shows up, and he expects to pay the bill. And what we saw is when the waitress said that someone has already paid for your family and for the bill, Kevin dropped his head, and the whole family went to prayer. And right before our eyes, they were praising God and giving thanks. Best $35 I've ever spent. Does this make sense at all? Or do I need to go over it all over again? In other words, be nice. Be nice. Be nice. Father, thank you so much. And your word can be so practical. Father, I hear so many spiritualized things that just confuses me. And then I get fearful and I get ashamed, not knowing what I should do with what I have. And then I worry about not having enough. Father, if I could just stop believing people and TV preachers and spiritual sounding counselors, but just look at the scriptures and what you've said. You've called us to be your stewards. All that we have belongs to you because Jesus, your Lord. Ours is simply to distribute what you've given us. Some to our family we give thanks, and you shalot us, and we are content. And some that you give us a seed that we might invest and be a blessing to others as they indeed praise and give worship to you. And then, Father, indeed, we've brought honor knowing that you will not forget our love for the saints.